Well, hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere Demo and Q&A webcast. My name is Dave McCormick. I'm VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to present Dion McCormick, no relation, who is our lead solutions engineer. Today, Dion is going to be doing a presentation at the very beginning of it. I believe he's going to be covering testing today, which I think will be a very interesting subject. But more importantly, after that, he is here to answer your questions. So please, by all means, go ahead and type any questions you may have into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. All right. Also want to let you know that today's session will be recorded or is being recorded, and you'll be able to find a copy of this and other recordings at videos.alphasoftware.com. Finally, if you do have questions that you think of outside the webinar or any comments about the webinar that you want to email, you can always send an email to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. So let me just take Dion off mute. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Doing great. Yes, I am.
Awesome.
Welcome, everybody. Yeah, it's going to be a fun day today. I got some interesting stuff to share. It's going to have a little bit of code in it, so nobody freak out, but it's going to be fairly minimized. But, you know, we are a low-code platform, so we're going to keep it low for our meeting today. But thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you joining us. Hey, take the time to go to the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel and put in your questions. We love those. That's why we're here. Along with that, you can always send those in the future to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. We monitor that closely and use that for content for our webinars and other pieces there. Couple things, quick announcements. One, I don't have a slide for this, but our esteemed colleague, David here, has now started a Transform weekly webinar. So we're going to focus a lot on Alpha Anywhere. We'll touch on Transform here, but you know, if you're really looking for that deep Transform data, Dave is your guy. And so, Dave, you want to mention anything about that? I mean, we had our launch one yesterday. Went great.
We did. It's open right now just to charter members, but if someone wants to sneak into our charter member program, we might be able to do that. And for those of you who, who show up here every week, I think we'd be able to do that. Right now, charter membership is small, but we are accepting new people. If you have any questions at all about Transform, we actually have a new email alias set up. It's TF, as in Transform Service, at alphasoftware.com. That is monitored by a team of us here. So if you have questions or you want to get started, send an email over there and we'll get you going.
Excellent, excellent. So again, feel free, if you're interested, again, it is limited, but we love our developers. So send an email to that, and Dave will be monitoring that along with our team. Also, I know Sarah has been very busy on developing and getting ready our launch of our Transform dedicated website for documentation. So as always, we have an amazing documentation site, which you can reach through the Alpha development environment at the open documentation. That will take you to the web page here. Here you can use full text search to find any information about Alpha, and we're going to have a dedicated website for Transform, so we can kind of keep it really focused. In that way, people who are just doing Transform stuff without any Alpha anywhere there. But you're going to see a mix between the two, because obviously one of our key goals is to have both Transform and Alpha Anywhere work together to create amazing things. So I tend to say it's the peanut butter in my chocolate, or chocolate on my peanut butter. Transform and Alpha Anywhere are really going to work well together to create even more amazing systems here. So awesome stuff. A couple other quick things. First, as we've talked about, we have Alpha DevCon 2018. We're almost to summer. It's crazy, but we have our agenda with a lot of really good stuff. So if you haven't signed up, make sure to get your position. Those are going very, very fast. You can register, you can look at the agenda, and you can also get a little information about the venue we're going to be at. And really excited. That's going to be a phenomenal event. We've really restructured it to make it even more focused, concise, and impactful than previous years. So, and also, I don't know if you've ever flown into Orlando, but it's dirt cheap. So it's a lot less expensive to get to, which is always a big, big plus there. So there. And as we've mentioned before, if you're interested in helping us mentor new people, have some skill sets you would like to share, please contact us. You can send it directly to guides@alphasoftware.com, and we go from there. So excellent. With that, what I'd like to do today, as I introduce this, let me go ahead and scoot down here. Dun, 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 dun. We've had our ongoing DevOps series talking about how to set up not only Alpha, but the environment around Alpha to really optimize your development process, meaning everything from the coding, or what we like to call low code, build, test, release, deploy, operate, monitor, and plan, and get into that cycle. And Alpha is uniquely positioned because we minimize the amount of code and other thing you need to do. You can focus a lot of your energy on these elements here in terms of really making sure you're listening to your users, enhancing your system, deploying new and updated versions very quickly, and there's a lot of capabilities. So we've talked about things like source control and other pieces that allow you to optimize this process. Well, we want to focus on one area in particular called test. So let me go ahead and go down to my new series location here. Yep. So we want to talk about testing. Testing is a critical element. And often, it's really, hit or miss. I've seen a lot of projects and test is kind of like, well, we're going to give it to the person to do some testing. And there's a huge advantage, especially when you go to an agile development process, to look at the testing aspect of your development process. Because test does two things. One is that it confirms the system does what it's required to do, but also test identifies things that were happen that you didn't anticipate to happen. And test does one thing that's hugely important. Allows you to sleep at night. When you do a release, if you've gone through a good testing process before you release, you will have a much better enjoyable life because you won't be stressing, well, did I release something? Am I going to have emergencies? I'm going to have these other pieces here. And testing takes different flavors. One of the things we want to do is kind of dive into this area and look at this area and look at a number of different elements of that and to kind of bring our overall community up. And again, if you've already done a lot of testing, have a lot of skills in this area, we'd love to hear from you. We appreciate you being involved, but I'm going to gear this kind of from starting point there. So we're going to focus on that testing element there. So the series, we're going to have a series of presentations, which today is the first one. One is talking about structuring your app for testing. Next, we're going to dive into web app testing and then talk a little bit about mobile app testing in the next one, which obviously a lot of our alpha solutions now are consisting of both web dashboards, backends in there, and then also talking a little bit about what you can do within the build process to help automate some of all these overall and some techniques that larger development teams are using that you may be able to apply within your situation. But today, we're going to be talking about structuring your app for testing. And this is important. Now, again, Alpha is a low-code development platform. So our goal is to have you write as little code as possible. So obviously, the more you can use the built-in functionality, for instance, in UXs, like the built-in form validation and things like automated drop-down box building and other things like that, the less testing you have to do. And the reason why is that Alpha has done the testing for you. All of those features and capabilities built into our system have been heavily tested, heavily used over years, if not decades of time. So you can really feel comfortable with that. But the reality is you're probably going to have some logic in your system. And that logic could be some Xbasic code that does some calculations or does some data lookups or other things like that. And or you might even have some Node.js code that has been put together or brought into the system. So we notice that, the reality in the world is you can do so much with no code, but then you get to a point where you need to go to low code, and that's where Alpha really excels. And actually, one of the benefits of Alpha is that we allow you to do that. You're not stuck with a no code where here's your template. Oh, you want to do that? Well, sorry, export the code and start coding it all on your own and manage it on your own. You're out of the environment. We do it within that environment. But there's definitely a method to the madness about how you do this, because if you do it right, it will allow you to put in place a much more disciplined testing regimen And again, as we mentioned before, have a much more confidence in terms of what you're going on. And super important, when obviously after you've deployed it, you go to the next version, there's going to be changes. This allows you to manage that change process much more efficiently, more confidence, and make things simple from there. So first and foremost, process. And one of the most important concepts here is that if you are going to have any kind of business logic code or anything else, you need to centralize that in a central spot. And I do it primarily for testing, but also just for management and sharing and other things that are valuable to there. We're going to do a quick demonstration of how this will work today. And there's three major ways you can do it. One is you can put it in what's called an Xbasic function library. The other is you can do it in a Xbasic module. And a third method is you can put your code in an Xbasic class. They all perform the same thing, which is allow you to take your code and put it in a central location in your project, which then will allow you to then reuse it both on multiple projects, which is really cool, but within your existing project there. Now, what's cool is that we're going to use along with and today we're going to focus on using the Xbasic class. And there's a real key reason for that is that I really encourage people, if they start thinking about, okay, yeah, I want to start centralizing your code, look at doing it in Xbasic class. There's a lot of really cool advantages programmatically for classes, but the number one advantage around that is that in our new generation of web API publishing, which is coming out very soon, Xbasic classes are the central point of that capability. So if you start with classes, you're going to be able to be in position to actually use a lot of the web API publishing capabilities down the road. So I really encourage you, if you're going to look in there, you're free to use any method, and I see the different methods out in the different projects we do. But method number one that I would suggest is if you're starting, go in and put them in classes. And there's some really good documentation in our Alpha Anywhere documentation system that Sarah and the team has put together with examples of classes and how to use them from those standpoints there. Now, the other tool I use is called the Xbasic Script Editor, and this is really a historical tool, and I'm going to show you a demonstration of that today, of how I use that to create scripts. And very important, there's a way to manage that is also very important. So the next, I'd say, hey, let's go in and do a demonstration. Now, again, this is going to be a little more code-centric so people who are not as coder, bear with us. It's going to be very simple. It's not a lot. I'm going to take my time, but it's going to focus on that. But it's a key concept, especially if you have business logic that you need to bring and maintain within your system. So with that, I'm going to jump over to my development environment. Before I do so, Dave, just want to make sure that everything's coming through okay?
All is coming through okay.
Great, great.
Although a couple people have told me that the sound is kind of junky today. I heard that a little bit earlier on, but if you have any complaints about sound, just please let me know.
Yeah, let us know.
So we'll see what we can do. Yep.
And remember, we are recording this, and the recording hopefully shouldn't have junky sound. So
the recording should be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can always come back, and if you missed a critical element, it's like, and the most important thing is, so I'm glad everybody got that, and they now know what the
Don't make
most
me repeat
important
that
thing.
Either. Yeah, exactly.
Let me repeat. The most important thing is, oh, and that is so good. Now, thank you for joining us. So, okay. So what I want to do is show you a very simplistic example. Let's say you have been asked and requested to create a loan calculator that will be published on the web that allows someone to take in a loan amount and a term and create a monthly payment. Pretty simple. So let's look at this. I've gone ahead and created a UX, which is a form, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open that form here. And this form is very simple. It includes a field for putting in the amount, a field for putting in the term, and then a button that does it, and then it shows the monthly payment. So let me go ahead and show you that running. So I clicked Working Preview. Here's my form. You'll see I have an entry field for amount, term, and monthly payment. So I'm going to go in here, put in 1,000, and then I'm going to put my 10 to be 10 months. I'm going to click Calculate, and boom. It calls an Xbasic callback. Now, again, I could do this in JavaScript here, but this is around centralizing your logic. So when I click this, it does an Xbasic callback that runs a function that basically takes the amount, divides it by the term, and gives me my monthly payment and shows it there. And so if I go back here, I'm going to first look at this calculate button. I'm going to double click on that. You'll see the only thing that's doing is called an Xbasic, or an Ajax callback, and it's calling a function called calculate monthly payment. And so that's what this does. So now what I'm going to do is that when the person clicks this, it calls back to the server and it looks for a function called calculate monthly payment. And in my Xbasic functions here, here's my function. And as you can see right now, we have a amount, a term. We get the amount from the submitted data. So for people who are new to this, when you do an Xbasic callback or an Ajax callback, I'm so fixated on Xbasic. What happens is the browser sends something called the E variable back to the server. And in there is all the data inside the form. So for instance, it's got e.data submitted. It includes all of the value of the different fields. So I can grab what the amount is, the term. And then what I can do is, in this case, I'm doing something very simple, which is dividing the amount by the term and then setting the value of my output field monthly payment. So that's all this does. It defines a couple of things. It puts those values from the interface, runs it, and sends that information back. When it does, it updates there. And as you can see, that's all it does. It basically takes the amount, goes to term, and does calculate and comes back with the amount or the monthly payment right there. Now this is fine and dandy and works fine, and you're welcome to use this methodology here. But one of the issues is that this is actually a very simple algorithm. There's not much to it. There's no data lookups. There's nothing going on. And so if I need to test this thing, first I have to go in every time and put in some different values. So if I wanted to do 5 different situations, let's say it's a more complicated where you have a rate and you have a term and you have like a prepayment penalty or so many payments you've made per day. So to test this, I have to go through this every time and put in different values and do it. So it becomes very cumbersome. The other issue you're going to see is that this algorithm, whatever that algorithm is now embedded in this UX here. So the actual code for doing that algorithm is in this UX. Now, let's say I created a new grid or a report or a web page, any number of different things, and I want to reuse that algorithm. Well, now what I have to do is each new one I create, I have to copy and paste that into each new thing, into the report, into the UX, into the grid. And the challenge becomes over time, if you have this in 4 different places and you have to make a change to that algorithm or, do some better error checking or whatever it happens to be, you have to find everywhere inside your app, open that up, modify it, and make sure it's good. So now all of a sudden you have more work to do and life becomes more difficult. Now, Alpha has a tool, just to let you know if you want to do it that way. You can go into File, where is it? It's Edit, Search in All Web Project Files. And when you do that, I can say, let's look up for term. And when you do, it's going to list anywhere that term is. So let's say it's amount. I'm looking up the word amount. And I do search. Oh, it's in here. I mean, they're all in here. So if I needed to find something in mine, but if I got 10, 20, 30 different places I reference this, even if I find them, I have to go into every one of those and modify them. So it makes more sense for me, and I'm not sure why that's showing there, for me to centralize this code. So something as simple as I'm just doing this calculation, I'm going to do it there. So what I'm going to do is I've gone down here and I've created a Xbasic class. And let me go ahead and open here. So we'll go ahead and we're going to see this as a class. Now I'm going to dive into classes a little bit. This is not a class on classes, but to show you an example of how this works. So what a class is just a central set of code. And in this case, I've got this class library here called Alpha Software Alone. So now I can put in my code in one central place. And a class consists of 2 things. One, the class consists of parameters, or I forget what the technical term is for, but anyway, it creates, these are methods. Methods are functions, and I forget, it's either, you can call them parameters, or there's a number of different terms for it from why you do that. So the idea is these are the different elements like name, amount, term, And then a method is an actual function that does things like this. So you can see I have an amount in term, and then I have a function called getMonthlyPayment that basically takes the amount in the term and returns it as a value there. So so from this standpoint, it's very strange. So this could get as complicated as I wanted in here, and so it could have multiple lines. It could make database lookups, everything else you want. You could have multiple parameters to your things, all the pieces here. Now, how do I actually run this class? Okay, so I'm going to go here to, now I'm going to jump over. So this is my class, and what I want to be able to do is actually exercise this. So I could go ahead and start writing it right in here, but I've got a different method I would like to do, and this actually goes towards testability. So I'm actually going to go to my control panel. Now remember, there are two control panels. There's the web projects control panel, and then there's the historical control panel in here. And in the historical control panel, if I were putting together a DBF solution, I could put together tables, forms, and browsers. But there's a very powerful situation here called code, where I can write and add little scripts of Xbasic in here. So I'm going to go ahead and I've created an Xbasic script here called test monthly loan. So I'm going to edit that script. So I'm going to click design and it opens up. So basically, this is my code, my logic that is in my system. In my code editor here is a little script that's going to actually do that. So what I'm going to do, and I'll walk you through this code, and again, for people who aren't code-centric, bear with me, it will make a lot of sense in a minute. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to come back to this statement in a moment, but what I do is I dimension what's called a class instance of my code. So for instance, you'll notice in here, it's called alpha software : loan. So like if I were saying, like if I were mentioning something, I could say dim, I could do something like, you know, dim name as C, or dim the number as N. So C is character N. So these are built-in variable types, C and N. And so I can just define those directly. In this case, what I'm saying is, oh, dimension this instance of a version of my class. So it creates one of these that I can use. And the cool thing is that each time I do, then I can have multiple ones working in the system. Now, once I've dimensioned this thing, in this case called my loan, you can see now I can say my loan.amount is equal to 10,000 and my loan.term. Now again, amount and term is these items in my class instance, our class library, meaning I put in here saying that the thing alpha software loan has a variable called amount and a variable called term. So now all I have to do is say my loan.amount is equal to that and my loan term equals 10. And then what I can do is run that method that says run the method getMonthlyPayment. And so when I do that, when I execute this piece of code here called my loan getMonthlyPayment, it basically goes in here, it starts running, it goes, oh, amount, okay, I'll get whatever the current amount is, I'll get whatever the current term is, and then once I've done that calculation, I will return the value back as that amount. So again, I dimension a instance of my class, I set my amount, my term, and then I call that, and then this little show var just shows what the result of it is. So watch, I'll hit this. Ah, there you go. 10,000 divided by 10 gives me 1,000. Well, let's do 100. Boom, 100. Let's do 20. There we go. 20 is 500. So you can probably already see immediately, instead of me having to go through here and go, okay, I'm going to do test case number 1, 100, and this is 20. What's my calculate? Oh, it looks good. I can now go in here and I can write this and I can have it automated. In fact, let's do something interesting. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, I'm going to dimension result as N, and I'm going to say the result is equal to this. Okay, so instead of showing it, I'm basically running the algorithm I'm putting there. Now I'm going to go say if result is equal to 100, then else, and I'm going to throw up a message box. I'm going to say passed, and I hope my math is right, message box failed. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Let's go ahead and save this, run it.
Oh, missing a parenthesis.
Oh, thank you. Extreme programming. There you go. Ah, it passed. Is it 10? Oh, nope, it failed. So now I can write these scripts that it will exercise my algorithm get monthly payment. And if I want to get fancy, I could create like multiple of these. I could write the results out instead of showing a message box. I could write it out to a file. I could even send an email if it went wrong, you know? And so what it is now instead of me having my code embedded in here and inside my UX where I have to manually check it, I put it in a central location. I can now write automated scripts that will go through and run things. So if I go in here and I change this, and I go and I change it and I go, oh, it's actually this, I can now save that. Okay, so let's give you an example. I'm going to save that, and let's go back here, and I've got a test. Everything's working great. I know that if I put in 10,000 and 100, I should get 100 back. And sure enough, it does. It passes. Now the customer calls me and says, you know what? We determined monthly payment a little differently. So now I go in here and I can say, okay, divided by 10, whatever. That's the new monthly payment. Now I can go in here and I'm going to run this and watch what happens. Uh-oh, it failed because my result is not correct. It should be 10. Now I go pass. So this gives you a method for you to create tests to validate that the logic that you have created is correct. And if the logic that you have created is correct, then anytime you edit this, you can run your test scripts and make sure so let's say in here, you added a new function in here, and it's like get yearly payment. Okay. And let's say it's this times 10, or 12, I'm sorry, be 12. So basically, I'm going to get the monthly and multiply it by a year, like so many months, and that gives me my yearly payment. So a couple things is one I'd probably add there, but now I can still run this, and I can make sure that any modifications I made to this class didn't screw up my existing functionality. So the cool thing is after time, and what you can do is a good practice is, and I've heard that one of the best practices ever is create your test script first and then write your code. And then basically you're able to say, okay, this is how I know it should work. And therefore, every time you touch that code or even time you release, you can do this and then you can walk away knowing, great, everything works fine. And even if I go in here and I change some other things that aren't going to change the result, like I add a comment in here or anything like that, then what's going to happen is when I run it, I can say, even those little small changes, it didn't affect something. Now, the great part about that is now that I have confidence and I've created my core code, I've created test scripts to make sure they're running. I can run those test scripts every time I do a build and a deploy to feel comfortable about it. Now I can go back in here and I'm going to click this. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go into my UX here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here. And now what I'm going to do is you'll notice, basically I've copied my code in there. Amount is equal to amount. Term is equal to a term. So basically I grab the values. Now I'm feeding those values into mine. I get the result. And now I'm going to set the result to be here. Great. Now I can do working preview. Let's do 1,000, 10, or 40. Let's do calculate. And there you go. Or whatever it happens to be. There we go. So the cool thing now is that if I go in and change this right here, I don't have to worry about this. This is going to work. It's going to take whatever change I made to this and just work. So now I don't have to find it. So if I'm using this in 5 different places in my system, I don't have to go in and find them and correct them and change them. And I go, oh, I missed one. So now all of a sudden my algorithms are off. So centralizing code basically gives you this advantage of change in one place for your cost and maintainability is lower. You can create automated scripts very readily against that, which improves your testability, your ability to sleep at night. And what's also nice is that, let's say down the road you get a new project, and this new project happens to need the same functionality. Well, all I have to do is take this file, copy it to that other system, and now all those functions are available to me in that new project. So it allows you to use code reuse and code things. So you can really imagine what you can go from there. But the heart of it, and I think the most important thing, is that now I can create these automated test scripts and be able to run them anytime I make a change and feel comfortable about that. And that's the heart of it. So that's the idea of, if you have business logic, get them out of your UXs, your grids, and your reports, put them in a central location. I highly recommend using classes. If you don't use classes, use Xbasic modules or Xbasic function libraries. And with that in mind, then it unlocks all these nice things for you as a programmer to automate your stuff. And the cool thing is that, as we showed in here, test here, you can now automate that. Every time you are going to do a release, you can rerun all those tests and make sure all of your core logic is working exactly the same. And that's super important if you change the logic. If you change the logic, you'll probably end up either modifying your tests or enhancing them to make sure that new logic works correctly. Then when you go through tests, when you actually do a release, you don't have to worry about your users finding ruh-roh that doesn't work correctly, and you have to go through a whole cycle. So that's the first step in our DevOps series about testing. Structure your app for testing. Put your code in a central location, either a function library, a module, class. Create Xbasic scripts to automate the testing of that. And again, you can get really sophisticated. You can create one script that could run 100 tests. It could actually call tests and other things. I mean, there's many, many different ways to do it from there. Then, obviously, at that point, go through, and wherever you're using it, you can then use this concept inside your UXs. So now, instead of actually having the algorithm, you can do it here. And then your life is going to be a lot easier. Now, I did mention, and I want one other thing. You'll notice something. When I wrote my script, I put this little thing called delete my loan. Now, that's not necessary, but I found it's good practice, and here's the reason. If I publish this system up to a server, what it does is, when I do to publish it, it's going to take this file, which basically just has code in it, puts it on the server. Now, the way the server works is that the server tries to be as efficient as possible. So the first time it sees this, it takes that code and puts it into quote unquote memory on the server. And then the next time you refer to this, it goes and it doesn't reread the file. It basically uses what's already available. Now that's good because it makes things faster. But a problem I found was the following, was that if I change this code and I publish it to the server and someone is already using the server, that code is already loaded up, then it won't take the new code. So wherever I define this, I do delete my loan, which will get rid of this and force a reread of this information into the memory. And therefore, I know I always have the latest and greatest, essentially, code for my whatever object it is there. And that's just something I do on all, and it doesn't really cause you, there's a very slight performance penalty, but, you know, versus having, because the problem would be, wow, my calculator's not working. I changed my algorithm. Why isn't it doing it? Well, this will get rid of that. It's just a little gotcha that I put in there. So I always put that there. So centralize your code, get it out of your UXs and reference that code in one places. I highly recommend you use Xbasic classes, because Xbasic classes have a lot of neat benefits for the future in terms of APIs. Plus, it's kind of a more modern programming paradigm. And last but not least, get your tests automated, because then you're going to feel really comfortable. And in fact, you can actually ask your customer, okay, here's the algorithm, but hey, give me a set of test cases. You write those test cases and put them in here. Then you can report back to your customer. You can say, here's the algorithm. Here are the test cases. Here's my code running that algorithm, and the results of those test cases were there. And then if they find an error, you can say, well, let's create a new test case to capture that, or let's alter it to get it properly. And it just gives you a better structure to go after these kind of issues here. You're going to find it's going to bring a lot of benefits to your programming adventures. So that's the first in our series about next time we're going to talk about how to do web app testing and automate that, and then we'll get into mobile app testing and build processing kind of scenario. But with that, I'd like to turn it back to Dave and see if we have any questions that are available.
Do we? Wow. Actually, yeah, we do.
Oh, good.
So the first question is about the load class function in Alpha Anywhere, and the question is, do you have to use load class? Are you familiar with what they're talking about here?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, in fact, let's see, I wonder, yeah, that might be the better way to go. And clarification, yeah. So there's a function here called loadClass, and then I put in here alpha, the name of the class. And actually, I might have given people wrong data, and I could correct it.
All right.
So what this does is this is what forces the system to reload that class. I thought this did also, because when it did it, but it's possible it doesn't. Maybe we need to use the load class on there. And maybe Sarah, yeah, okay. Let's just say this. It's safer, and Sarah's gone ahead and put a link in there to do this, is to force a load class in there. Because again, Alpha does some nice things in terms of storing it. So every time, if you have a class already, it doesn't do a load class unless you explicitly state it. And I find load class is really handy because it makes sure that whatever the latest code is in this file is loaded into the server when you runs it, or when you run it there. So when you make an update, it's not going to use some old cached version of your function. It'll use the newest version as you intend. Is that sort of the... That's exactly it. Yep. And you'll notice that I'm doing this whole, so if there were like 20 functions in here, I don't have to load each function. I basically just load the class, and it will reinstantiate this inside the server, so that the next time you actually create an instance of it and do stuff, all your changes will be there. And that's just a little gotcha I ran into before. So yeah, again, I always delete just as a matter of practice, but also load class is the way to go, because it's going to force a reread of that class into cache, as you say. Good catch. Thank you very much, everybody.
Fantastic. So Sarah, who's in charge of documentation here at Alpha Software, has posted a link for documentation on Xbasic function libraries, modules, and classes. And that is right there in the chat window. If you can't find it, sometimes you don't have a chat window in some versions of GoToWebinar, depending on how it has been launched. You could just ask us and we'll email the link off to you. This has been available in Alpha Anywhere since version 3.1, but was not available before then, the classes. I just want to let you know, because someone had a question about whether or not it was available in Alpha 5, and it was not. Couple other class questions. This person is interested in creating a class file that's used between multiple projects. Can you do that? And if so, how?
Absolutely, man. Now we're talking. First and foremost, yes. Classes are a great way to create code sharing, meaning code that you know you're going to use over and over in multiple projects. And the reality is that it's just a file on the disk. In fact, if I go here, I'm going to go back to mine. I'm going to click this button right here, which is our folder icon. This opens where all these files are at, and you're going to see there is a file here called alphasoftware.loan.a5xbclass, and that's the file that's in there. And alphasoftware.loan, so Alpha Software is called the namespace, and this is the actual name of the class loan. Now, just a little diversion for a moment. The reason I put in what's called, I don't have to do that. I could just go like this, called class loan. But the reason I do that is that in case I bring in multiple class libraries from different people and they use the same name, then I can differentiate between those in the system. So this actually is really powerful because it allows you to be careful that if two people name, like, you know, they may have a class called logging. So Joe creates one called logging. Bill creates one some logging. You copy them both into the same project, there's no way to tell the difference between them. But if one was called Joe logging and the other one was called Jim logging, then what would happen is that Alpha looks at it and says, oh, this is a different thing. So I'm going to open it up, separate it. So there's a Jim logging feature on it, and then when you reference it from there. So anyway, on your file, if I go to the file right here, this is just, and actually I'm going to open it up, and as you can see, it's just a text file. So all you have to do is you can just copy that file into your web projects folder, and boom, you now have all those features in there. Now, the only other thing you may want to do is look at version controlling your stuff, like putting it into a Git repository or something like that, and then therefore you always know what your master one is. That's a little bit more sophisticated. There's one other thing that's kind of cool, and this is about sharing. You can encrypt these. There's a way for you to encrypt this that allows you to encrypt your class libraries. So if you're going to create a bunch of like very proprietary logic and you want nobody to be able to see that except you and your development team, you can actually encrypt this class library where you could give it to someone, they can use the classes, but they can't open up this file and look at it unless they had a password. And that's really powerful, is that it allows you to kind of encapsulate and secure your secret sauce, but also you could actually create and sell class libraries to other people. And, hey, that's, and then they can't really take your code and go with it. So we really haven't seen anything like that, but it opens up that capability, is that if I created a really cool loan calculation class and I wanted to give it to people, then now they don't have to recreate this code. They can just buy it, or I can give it to them, but I can protect it using encryption. So therefore, they can't take the code out and reuse it without proper access and permissions and things like that. So again, to share it among multiple, it's just a simple file on your hard drive, and it's done by the namespace.name.xbsac class. You can just I could copy this one, go to another project, drop it right in, boom, now all these functions are available. And that's really powerful, because every time you do a project, I'm sure you're going to find 5 or 10 things that you redo over and over again, especially interfacing with databases or doing different things like that. You can create these cool class libraries, reuse it, and therefore your efficiency goes up over time. And if you've built in your automated test, your comfort level is going to be super high, because you just know those class libraries work, and you don't have to worry about redeveloping that code over and over and over again.
Excellent. Okay, a question here that doesn't have anything to do with class.
No problem.
Question without class. All right. Now this one says that they have a UX, and the UX has got a pick list in it, and the pick list has 20,000 employee names.
Whoa.
It's a lot of names. So if you're thinking mobile application or even UX, that's kind of a big payload. That's a lot of names coming down. They want to be able to allow the user to choose from the list, from that list, and add it to a particular project. So the project is the internal name for something that they have going on in their application. But then they have another UX where instead of adding employees, you're reassigning employees, and they still need access to that list of 20,000 employee names. So now ideally, since the lists of the employee names doesn't change, it would be super cool if they could use that same list in both UXs without having to download it twice from the server. In other words,
I have an idea.
Oh, you do? Excellent.
Okay, is this mobile or is this is web?
I'm actually just knowing a little bit about the circumstances, going to guess that it's web, but
yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, because it's definitely a different animal there. So let me go to demonstration. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead and create a cool thing. Let's go, first I'm going to create a UX. And for people who are new, this is our form. And in here, I'm going to go to my forms, and I'm going to say selected customer. Okay. Okay. So what I want to be able to do is have the ability to select a customer and put it in here. And I want to kind of reuse that methodology. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, I'm going to call this select, great question, customer _ UX. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here, I'm going to say new, and I'm going to go to web component, I'm going to say grid, and I'm going to go in here, bear with me, I'm building a grid, I'm going to select my connection, I'm going to select my customers, and the fields I want in there are customer code and company name. So as you can see, pretty exciting, it's just a customer list. Okay, so I'm going to save that. I'm going to call that select customer _ grid. Okay, great. So now I'm going to go back to my select customer here, and I'm going to go down here. I've selected there. I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to go down to where it says lookup. So I've selected the list. I go to lookup, and in here I'm going to click there. So I've enabled the lookup. So this field now has a lookup on it. it gives me a choice. I can either do an edit combo, an auto suggest list, but I like grid component. And with that grid component, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to point to that little grid I created. So we're going to go find my select customer grid. Click OK. There we go. Now the field mapping is I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to pop up the grid to pick the thing, but what do I want to do? So I'm going to say the field selected customer in my current form is going to be filled in this case, with the customer code from the grid. So that means when I click on the item in the grid, it's going to populate that. So let's go ahead and do working preview. Now it's got a little arrow, or a little selector. I click there, pops up there. You'll see I have a grid here. I click select, closes. Now it's selected that customer that goes in here. Now if I want to, my grid can be, I can create a different UX, set up the lookup to go to that same grid, and I'm reusing that thing over and over again. And if I ever need to change it, I change it in one place. Like let's say I wanted everywhere I do that, I want to go to my select customer grid. I also want to show the city they're in. So now I've done that. Now the next time the person runs this, my grid now has city in there, anywhere I select that. So it allows you to kind of do reuse in terms of what it is. The other thing that's powerful is that I'm not just limited to one field. If I want to, I can actually have multiple fields, and I can grab the information out of that grid and put them in other fields on this. So if I wanted to grab the customer or city and save it in this, or another secondary code, and those grids could be done on views and everything else. So that's really a good way to kind of reuse and use that. So now I can just sit there and copy this field. Okay. I go and I'm going to create a new UX here. Oh, I hit the wrong thing. New web component UX. And I'm going to go in this UX to the controls, and I'm going to sit there and I'm going to paste that control. Now I go in here, and guess what? Works exactly the same as the other one. No coding, no nothing. Now, one thing you can do also, which really enhance it, let's say you're going to use this over and over again for whatever reason. You can actually take this control here, and actually I'm selecting that control. I can go to menu, save selected controls in my library. And I'm going to call this customer select field. And I'm going to say local, so it's just for this web project, but it could be global, meaning I could use it across multiple things. Now what's cool is I go in and I'm going to go back here and I'm going to create a new UX. Okay. And I'm going to go to my controls. I'm going to say load controls from library. Here's my customer select field. Boom, boom. Go in here and it just works. I'm off to the races here. All right. Now, if I want to, if I have certain behaviors that are different here, I could go now into this control and make some modifications, do whatever I want to do. But the core functionality of looking up the same data over and over in a field is going to be the same and allow you that ability to have a single place. And then you can change the grid as you see fit. That's how I would attack that.
Very cool. Just one quick follow-up question. Besides using a grid, can you use a list on a UX, or is that not one of the supported things?
Well, in the lookup, the answer is no, not really. This is okay. The two methods. There's three methods for doing lookups that kind of automate that for you. Mm-hmm. A grid, auto suggest, and you're right. Grids are a little heavier, but if you strip down the grid pretty heavily, they're pretty. Especially for web-based project, you can do it there. If you were going to do a list control, you would probably create a series of pieces that work together and then copy all those as a single entity. But you're going to have that list on this UX here, unless you do something like open a UX, and it gets a little bit more complicated. There's other ways to handle that and do that. There's no real like open a list control kind of function available, but that would be it. So, okay. Gotcha. Because lists are actually part of a UX. They're like a sub-piece, whereas things like grids are actually separate entities that can be shared across multiple UXs and things like that.
And a follow-up question is, can you paginate that lookup? So you open up the grid, but you don't want to wait for all 20,000 records to appear at once.
Great point. Well, by default, grids are paginated. So
Okay.
when I load this up, it only loads how many I've told it. Then when I click a navigation, it actually has a callback to the server. Now, the other really powerful thing about this is I can sit there and do this. I'm going to add a search part, and I'm going to go in that search part. I want to look up city. Okay. So let's go ahead and go back here. So I'll save that. I'll go back here. Now let's just run this. I haven't changed anything on this field. Now I can go here and I have my search part and I can say Berlin, do a search, and notice I have a search. So if you had 20,000 employees and you want to say, give me all the employees of this division, you can add that search part. So therefore now when they select it, which is hugely powerful. So everything you can do in a grid from a search and order and everything. I mean, here's the other thing too. You can actually enter items into this grid. It's just a grid opening up in a window. And so that you could actually add records and then select them on the fly, which is really powerful because now you don't have to have them go back out to go to another page to do that. You could actually have them on the fly, be entering data, select that data and insert it in your curl UX. So there's a lot of really cool things you can do with it. And as you can see, the grid, you can make it work the way you want. So like in my grid, if I want to simplify this, I would go in and say, for instance, get rid of the page per selector, really make it very small and tight. And so it looks less like a grid and more of like a selection list. There's a lot of things you can do with that in that system. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. A couple other questions here. Let's start with I think this is an easy one. This person would like to put a switch control on, I'm presuming on a UX, but they'd like it so that when they click on, the background of the switch becomes green, and when they click off, the background of the switch becomes red.
Cool. So a switch control is a specific type of UX control. So I'm going to open up a new UX here, and I'm just going to create a blank one here. And I'm going to go to my controls section, and you'll see there's a switch control here, which is very powerful and very useful for mobile solutions. So I'll go my switch. Okay. Now we go to working preview. You'll see we have a switch control displayed. There it is. Oh, there it is. Oh, let's see. Let's go here and let's make that, let's say 300 px. So I'm just changing the width of this switch. I think that's what's causing the issue here. Okay, pretty cool, huh? You got, basically it's an on or off kind of capability here. So really nice for mobiles, mobile interfaces here. Now, a couple of things here. First, what is my text? I'm going to say pass, and then my off is called fail. So there's a lot of little things you can do to make this look really cool. Now, this is what you visually see. You'll notice fail, pass, fail, pass. And what's important is that's what's displayed, but you'll also notice the on and off. So this could be like a 1, and the off value could be 0. So if like you're putting in numbers or true, false, or whatever you have there. Now, in terms of changing the color on this, is the method that I'm aware of it is you're going to have to use the on select event. So what happens is the on select event is JavaScript. So let me go ahead and just do this. I'll go alert hello. Okay, so basically it says when someone selects this switch, I put in the alert hello. And so it just runs that little piece of JavaScript. Oops, might help to actually do it correctly. Okay, so you'll notice now when I go here, when I hit it, it says fail. Pass. So I can trap when someone clicks on there and run the on select event. Then what I can do is in here, and we can actually change, I believe we can change the class values of the diagram itself, or of the item there. So what I would probably do is modify the CSS for the switch here. And I apologize, that's a little bit beyond my skill sets. I just know that in onSelect, I can now modify any control on my interface, which includes this one, to modify its behaviors. Now, what we want to do is we want to look at, let's see, is there any, let's see, on select event, off flow. What I might do is I wonder if you can set the theme. So I might have to do a little bit more there, but I can change, I think, the class of my switch, and the class is what dictates the color for it. So currently I'm using the default class here. Where's the class? Let's see. Yeah, I'm using the class. Oh, that's for the field label. So that's how I do it. I need to research exactly how I would modify the color in the class so that it would change the color on the fly. There's no built-in like color change here. There's just for the text and for the on-off values here. So I'd have to do a little bit more research here. But bottom line is, once you're on here, we change the class of the switch. By changing the class, it changes the colors that are used for that switch, and it should re-render, but I'd have to do a follow-up kind of test on there from there. So very good question. That's a cool one. I can see where you want to change, the color. Now, what you can do if you're just looking for the on-off value, you can go into the class for the switch and modify it there. So if you'll notice, my style is alpha, and I don't, if I got my tweaks here, let me go ahead and open, tweaks. There. Okay, let me go. You can edit the style. So if you don't like the colors that come with it, you could just edit the style. And what that will do is, let me go back to where we were at. I'm sorry. And therefore, when this runs, instead of seeing the system class style, you can override that to be a different color. So if you don't need to change the color on the fly, the easier way you do it is just go to the web project, go to the web style builder, and change the color there. And then when it's displayed on the user interface, you're going to use different colors there. But if it's a situation, and you can set the on and off colors in the standard style. But I was thinking if you needed to, on the fly, look at some other data and then say, oh, it's now chartreuse versus red versus yellow, green on the fly, then you're going to need to use an on select event. And along with that on select is modify the style for this particular control on the fly, which is a little more difficult.
Terrific. Here's just a question about technologies that are being used. This person uses RDP, I assume Microsoft's RDP, for remote control, so they can log into a remote computer from their computer. But he also points out there's Real VNC, there's TeamViewer, there's other ones as well. What do you suggest, and what do you use when it comes to remote desktop stuff?
Gotcha. I use a little bit of both. So for all of my server stuff, I use RDP, and mainly because we're RDPing into a Windows server and it's built in, so it's rock solid. And what's kind of cool about RDP is actually you can have two people on the server at the same time. That's the limitation. You can't have more than that, just because otherwise people could abuse the server and they wouldn't get their money. So I use RDP for when I do server management, and it's super fast. It's optimized. If you'll notice, I'm on a Mac here. So there's actually a Microsoft Remote Desktop free client that you can download. Now that said, I also have a desktop machine at my house, and I use TeamViewer to punch into that. So when I need to access my desktop at my house, and I can use TeamViewer from anywhere in the world, and there's a free version for non-commercial use that is available on that there. But if I'm doing server stuff, RDP, it's built in, it's structured. Even like ZebraHost, when they'll give you the RDP information, boom, you're in and managing your server. There's clients, it's actually built into Windows, is that if you go into Windows and go remote desktop connection, this actually allows you to put in the address of the and then put in like your username and password, etc. You can also do what are called local resources, where you can add like your hard drive. So when you're on the remote, it actually shows you your local drive as the drive there. So I use RDP almost exclusively for server stuff. But again, I also use TeamViewer if I need to punch into a non-server environment. And both are secure. Both will need username and passwords to get in there.
That's terrific. One other, I've used a couple others as well. I've used GoToMyPC, which works fine, but it's a paid service, and I don't see a huge advantage of it over RDP for the most part.
Yeah.
But the other one that I've used, which I kind of liked, was Chrome Remote Desktop.
Ah,
And
yes.
so that's a free one from Google. And what I like about it is that they have clients for everything, including, not surprisingly, the Chromebooks themselves. So if you want to take a really cheap computer with you on the road, a Chromebook is a great way to go, but you could still have access to more high-power computers, to servers and things like that. So Chrome Remote Desktop I've used and works really pretty well.
Works great.
Yeah, excellent. So it looks like we've come to the end of our time. Dion, thank you very much for your presentation today on testing and for answering all of these questions. I'd also like to thank everyone who attended, and especially those who asked questions. That's what keeps the sessions lively. If you have any questions, though, that occur to you during the week or you'd like us to cover next week, please send an email to guides, Guides, @alphasoftware.com. And a recording of today's session will be available within the next 2 days or so at videos.alphasoftware.com. So thank you very much. Hope to see you here next Wednesday. Take care and goodbye.